Hey, fellow Gianteers, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. Um, we have a number of things upcoming on the docket of stuff that we want to do. We're hyped to uh, do a number of new projects, but the main one we want to start doing now is sort of a G&T Karma Mudra thing, which has been, I was thinking about it a little bit, Daniel. It's been a bit in the offing. It's been a long time coming, so to speak, to do this, right? But it's finally we're going to start talking about Karma Mudra, which is basically working with sexuality and spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of like, as I was doing the prep for the notes on this one, I was thinking, it fits into things we've talked about with love and relationship before. That's part of Karma Mudra too. So we'll probably have some references to those things, or we've done episodes around this. Sometimes this is known as the Yoga of Bliss or the Yoga of Desire. So learning how to use bliss as a spiritual tool, learning how to use desire as a spiritual tool. Good times. To get to the word itself, karma means action and mudra means seal. So this is like action seal. It's not like the James Bond of seals. It's not that kind of seal that you'd find like on the ocean, on the beach or something. It's seal like the seal of an empress or something, right? Like the imperial seal.
Yeah.
And the notion of when you get to a seal in this like usage in the tantric world or the Buddhist world is something like it seals your mind. It like imprints your mind with bliss is the idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the way that mudra in the way that I learned it is the same. But the way that they described it is that like it's signifying something that has intention behind it or has something of high regard behind it. So
Uh-huh.
like if you were to get
Mm.
something sealed by like an emperor or a king and it was to be delivered to you, you would know that the here the contents of what is about to be shared is authentic, right?
Yes.
It's authentic from the person who is getting it from you. And so in this way you are getting it from you, but then it's also like, yeah, it's a stamp of significance, you
Yeah,
know?
you're right. I mean, I totally agree. It shows that there's some importance to it, right? If the
Yeah.
if the emperor or the empress puts a seal on it, it's saying, okay, this is real and it's also important, and you better fucking read it. And
Hmm.
there it is, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I like this kind of use of this word, like in, Asian culture. I think that's kind of an interesting turn of phrase, right? To have a
Hmm.
seal on something, right? Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. All right, cool. So that's what we're going to be talking about, right? Um, and for the presentation that we're going to try to do, and we'll do our little series as we like to do. But we're going to be working a little bit from the presentation that comes from Dr. Nida.
Hmm.
He has this book called, I got it right here. I should hold
Yeah,
it
what's
up.
the name of the book, Eric? I want to make sure we
It
shout it out.
is Karma Mudra, the Yoga of Bliss.
Okay.
So we're going to try to be a little bit, I use the word authentic, that speaks to me, right? We'll try to be a little authentic in this. And one of the things you can do in the tantric Buddhist world or the Buddhist world or the Asian cultural world is you can kind of do a commentary. So we're gonna kind of go through and like look at what he has to say and then kind of throw our own impressions into, and
Yeah,
it just gives it an authenticity, gives it a kind of a structure to what we're up to, right?
yeah, yeah.
So, and I'm kind of like doing the prep on this stuff. I'm more the person doing a little bit of this. Daniel and I are working together, but I'm kind of reading through the book and kind of doing some of the prep notes on it. And I really like pieces of it that I thought, we'd kick around. First of all, he's coming at it from a medical perspective, and he's drawing on like a tantric Buddhist lineage that's very medical. And I think that speaks to, certainly what we kind of love, the integration of healing with spirituality, the medicine and the spirituality together. But it also gives it kind of a good flavor of like kind of a practicality too, you know?
Right,
And
right.
the idea that in Buddhist stuff, you can kind of frame things medically. I like that framing in Buddhism too. They kind of define things like here's your problem and here's the solutions, and there's a pragmatism to it.
Hmm. Hmm.
We were
Yeah.
joking about astrology earlier, and this is your Capricorn. And my past life, Virgo. We want to make things real and practical. So that speaks to me. Um, Now he traces it back. I'll put the context out, he traces it back to this figure named Yuthuk Ningthig. I don't know who this is, so it's not like a super famous person from my experience with this. There's some really famous names in the Buddhist tantric world. Naropa, Talopa, Saraha, there's like these really Gantapada. There's names that maybe everybody would know. This doesn't seem like like a figure like that I was familiar with otherwise. But I really love the sense that he's a doctor and he's a tantrika and he's trying to do this together. And I think that's pretty awesome. So, that's kind of the context for where he's coming from. It's kind of cool backstories. These things have backstories. He has this thing he calls the heart essence of Yuthok, which came from a vision from a Buddhist goddess or a Dakini. So he was having visionary experiences, right?
Mm.
And he was trying to transmit those forward, right? Which is kind of cool. And unlike being maybe a monastic person, because they have so many monastics in the Tibetan world, right? He's not. He's a lay person, right? What they sometimes call, like, I guess, a nakpa. But he's like a lay practitioner and a doctor, and that I like all that stuff. I think it's very cool. So
Yeah.
what I think Dr. Nida is trying to do is present this in a way that, again, has a medical vibe to it, has a pragmatic vibe to it, and to try to integrate the medical and the tantric. And I think that that speaks to our G&T very well.
And Dr.
Yeah,
Nida, he's a Tibetan medicine practitioner.
yeah, yeah.
So
Hmm.
that's his, this is his way of seeing things naturally.
Yeah, and I guess he draws from this lineage, from this particular, visionary tantrika, doctor person. I didn't know much about his background, but I think that's really interesting, right? To have that combination there. Anything else you want to say as a preliminary to this kind of stuff? Or are you good,
No,
Daniel?
no, we're good.
Okay, so then maybe we'll kick around the idea of like why to do this.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I kind of went through and just jotted down some of my thoughts with this, and I know you'll have your own too, and we'll throw it out to people. Probably they'll have their own as well, obviously.
Yeah.
But what occurred to me a little bit is like working with the emotions to transform them. And he gets to that at parts in like his presentation too. You don't want to repress these feelings. And I guess we'll have more of that as we go along because he has more to say about it. And I'm sure we'll touch on other parts of this as we try to push this forward. But like just to lead with that a little bit, these emotions are so powerful that to repress them is like not entirely psychologically or medically healthy, right? So I think it's better to kind of embrace them in a way, right? And try to use them and work with them rather than go to the place of like trying to repress things, right?
Hmm.
Because desires are so core. You got a thought on that before I kind of continue with my little vibe on this? Or you got stuff you want to say about
No, no,
that?
no. Go ahead.
So, I mean, to me, what struck me from a personal level is when I first started doing my Zen stuff, and we had conversations about this in past episodes a little bit, but I was struck by the Zen or Taoist idea, which overlaps nicely with what we're doing here too, kind of
Mm.
comes together as one big coherent thing, is that you want to like work with, sometimes in Chinese medicine, we use this phrase like lower jiao for talking about the energies of the pelvis, or I was imagining you would want to talk about the lower chakras, so you'll do your thing on that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But just the idea that you start from there because it sort of forms the foundation of who you are as a person, right?
Hmm.
These
Hmm.
energies are so core to who you are, the ones of the
Hmm.
lower jiao, the things that are sexual and the things that are, deep in that part of the system. And it's better to start there and learn how to like work with those and use them, and you kind of build from that foundation up.
Mm.
And so, that I thought was really important to me in my life, right?
Yeah.
And I'll give some other takes on it as we go, but like that seemed very important to me.
Yeah. And that's generally where, I mean, this people's sexual energy is it is the most powerful one, sexual energy, love, and those two things they're dancing with each other, all the
Yeah,
time. I mean, if you think, how many songs are written about love? And this is where, and it shapes you, it changes you, it's your identity. People who, there's Pride Month now because people who are unable to freely express their love of, whoever, right, of the same sex or whatever, your gender
yeah,
identity or whatever you're into, but you're able to do that more now. Whereas, for a long time that was like death for sure. I mean, and
yeah,
people
yeah,
are still not accepting of that now, but I'm using that as an example because it's such a large expression of how you view the world, right? Who you love is how you view the world in many ways. You know what I'm saying? And so in your ability to connect with other people, you know, it's like using the most kind of human energies to transform. And it is the largest transformational alchemical, elixir field of the body is the kind of the lower chakras, which is based around health, longevity, and immortality, like we talked about in the previous series. And
yeah.
if you have a well-functioning kind of lower jiao area, we can call it, or lower body, your your elimination is normal, is regular, being physiological, right?
Mhm.
And your sex drive is adequate for your own level of desire. I mean, you're probably you're in a really good spot, just if those two things are in order. And so to take those kind of two very um energies that have high potential and to turn them inwards and get them moving consciously as you sort of work your way up the ladder, if you will. um it's a requirement. You cannot, I don't know that you can, if anything's possible, but in all the systems that I've studied, that's where you start.
Yeah. I like the fact that you kind of brought in the love aspect of it too, because we've done obviously episodes on those kinds of things too as a transformative factor.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of like links up different parts of the person. So you might think love has a lot to do with the heart and sort of more like the chest, right? Those emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
But those are entwined with in a healthy way, hopefully entwined with the energies that are more the sexual energies that are more associated with the pelvis. And that axis is really powerful, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for us as like TCM people, sometimes we'd like to talk about how the heart and the kidney connect.
Mm-hmm.
The kidney kind of the major, internal organ that like is kind of in the pelvis, related to the pelvis, affects the lower jiao, right? Affects
Mm-hmm.
this kind of lower part of the body, this, sexual part of the body and this
Mm-hmm.
constitutional part of the body. And that's one side, and it also connects to the heart, and there's this feedback loop. So, you
Mm-hmm.
know, like it's good that I love that you're doing that. And I also feel like, and that's the attitude we're going to try to take through this whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could, in theory, do a Karma Mudra thing and just talk about sex the whole time, which we're going to do that, but not the whole time. We're also going to talk about, this other part, right? The relational aspect and how
Yeah.
transformative the whole thing is, because that's kind of part of the alchemy too. So I'm glad you brought it up, and it connects with other conversations
Yeah.
we had about these things.
I think the last part that is just popping back up in my head is that, like, one of the other things that I learned that I use all the time is that, like, creativity is the beginnings of creativity come from the second chakra, right? Like, kind of like the sexual chakra, if you will. Um, and the way in which that they have, what do you call, evidence for this, is caveman drawings. And that, like, instead of living outside nomadically, as soon as they have some semblance of protection from the elements and some regularity in their partner, we don't know how they lived. I mean, think caveman, you think man beat woman over head with rock. She stays, they have babies. She leaves eventually when the kid can run fast enough to get away from the man. But, you know,
That doesn't seem like the way it is, but that's for another time,
okay, fine,
right?
fine, fine. But, like, what do you find in there? That's where you find the beginnings of drawings.
Mhm. Yeah.
And they will say that this is it, because now that you're not so focused on just pure shelter and staying alive and keeping yourself safe from the elements, that you can move up to the next rung. And the next rung obviously is create sexuality, but it's also the very seeds of creativity. And so creativity, sexuality, playfulness, all of which are bound together. And when at least for me, when I think of, like, good teachers, like Lama Glenn being one of them, they have a high amount of playfulness and a high amount of
Yeah.
creativity. They often are either creative with their language, they might write or do artwork, or some aspect of this. And speaking of TCM, like, the heart and the kidney communicate. When this occurs, oftentimes people's creativity, you know, is regained at those points. So it's just such a deep thing to use all of those aspects of ourself to transform who we are. I wanted to just touch on a number of different things for those people who might, be more drawn towards one facet or another.
I love it in the sense that I was doing my meditation earlier, and I thought Daniel's going to talk about the second chakra. I know he's going to do this because we know each other so well, right? I'm like,
Mhm.
Daniel's going to do his thing. So I was thinking, okay, how do I feel about this? What can I ask you about, or continue on the conversation? Um, on the anthropological stuff, we have a kind of a standing invitation from Ryan Davenport, one of our two anthropologists on retainer or on call, or whatever you want to say it, to
Mhm.
talk about sex at dawn. So maybe we'll do sex at dawn
Yeah,
at some point
we
over the
should
course of
definitely
the
do it.
year, right?
Yeah.
But and we'll talk about all that kind of stuff. But I had a couple of reactions to it on the creativity thing. I'm trying to like I'm kind of rejuvenating myself after my retreat over the break, and
Hmm.
I was thinking about how, you know, in the Zen things I studied, they had this idea that you should do your Zen meditation. There's a great school in that you should do your Zen meditation, you should do some martial arts for power,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
But then also you should do something creative. So I've been kind
Yeah.
of like trying to I do music, you know, it's probably my main creative outlet, right?
Yeah.
And some writing, right? But it's so interesting that they made a point of doing the creativity
Yeah.
because that gets to that sort of lower jiao second chakra thing. And in that school, they were trying to do a lot to build up that foundation we've been talking about, that lower jiao. In Chinese medicine, they almost say like the whole constitution on a certain level is like reflected in the pelvis, is reflected in this part of the body, you know,
Yeah.
where the sexual energies are. It's kind of is the basis of your constitution on some level. And I was
Hmm.
thinking, you know, I'm I want to feel more creative. I'm going through and I'm trying to do creative things, and it like taps into that second chakra energy kind of thing. But I had one more thought because I knew you were going to talk about it, which is awesome. I love this conversation. When you think about, because I don't use quite the same chakra system, so this is a little bit more like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
yogic
Use it.
Patanjali thing. I'm a little bit more into the
Yeah. The Tibetan. You're like
spiritual.
a five guy.
Yeah, I guess that's right. So they got a bunch of chakras in that thing too.
That's true.
But so when you think of where that's at, if you try to match it to around where it is in the physical body, I know it's always a little bit hard to make chakras match perfectly. Where do you see that? Do you see that like in the perineum? Do you see it at the
No,
tailbone? Where do you
it's
see it?
above. It's below it's below the belly button. You know, it's below the belly button, above the. You
Like
know,
the three finger lengths down? Is that where you're getting
yeah.
to that? Like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So we have an acupuncture point called Guan Yan, right?
Yes.
Right. The the original gate or however you want to talk about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where you're seeing it.
Yeah. And the
Okay,
first
cool.
chakra is definitely like perineum or just above.
Okay, we'll get into this stuff later on. I was just curious, you
Yeah.
know. I had kind of like an interesting thing on the retreat too, because I was thinking about creativity. I mean, this is stuff, but we'll figure out how this matches up. But you know, in these energies that they think of in the lower jiao too, they also kind of talk about what are the deepest things that you matter to you so much most in life, right? They have that association with this
Mm-hmm.
pelvis area too, right? As we go forward, we can talk about it more, but they associate it with like the goddess Tara potentially,
Mm-hmm.
or with the Buddhist kind of enlightenment figure Amoghasiddhi, you know, the energy of accomplishing things, the enlightened quality of accomplishing things,
Mm-hmm.
you know, is the power of this. You can accomplish activities in the world, right? Which is kind of interesting in a creative sense too, right?
Mm-hmm.
You accomplish stuff. And so I was thinking about that, and I was meditating on it during my retreat, and it really clicked in me, you know, that the deepest things I want to do in the world is like learn these spiritual things and share them with people I love and care about. Like that's the deepest thing for me. There's nothing
Right.
else deeper than that for me,
Right.
right? But it was interesting then because I was trying to visualize like the Amoga City energies in the mandala. And the minute that clarified for me, it just popped, you know, and I was like, okay, this is very clear, you know. And I was just wondering how you see maybe that created to like connected to the creative energies, you know, these clarifying of what you really want at the core coupled with the creativity. Does that speak to you as like an interconnected thing, Danielle? Because
Yeah.
I
So
was wondering how you would think about that.
I guess what I could say that like, you're using the energy of the kind of, first and second chakra, or sometimes like when you're doing a practice where where you're meditating on the second chakra or the first, if we're starting from the bottom, but those two are they're close in proximity, and they're close in colors. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So like you'll oftentimes, instead of doing like one red and one orange, you'll just see like a burnt orange kind of
Mhm.
color, right? So you're working with that. And it's the fire element that you're working with, down there.
Mhm.
And if you think about it in terms of like an actual fire, well, what does fire put off? Well, heat and light.
Mhm.
And for me and my understanding, because I had definitely a deep realization about this some years ago, that's the light that begins to light the cavern of the body. That's the light that connects with the heart, that lights the eyes. You know what I'm saying? Those two
Mhm.
fires are like, what are they? I'm remembering, I think must have been Lord of the Rings, the third one, where they were trying to get them to light I don't know, the fires of wherever, to try so they can
Uh,
communicate between the different kingdoms to let them know that they're in trouble, you know what I'm saying? But I
yeah,
feel like
yeah,
that's like the original, like not the original, but the fire of the South, or deeper fire that then ignites the rest of the ones on the way up,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
lights the mind, it lights the inside of the body, and that's where the creativity kind of comes from in that way. It's like enlightening, quote unquote, air quotes, for those who are just who are listening and not seeing.
Yeah, it kind of fits into the idea. Like we'll see what we try to do in terms of the practicalities when we get to like the meditations themselves, because we're going to talk
Hmm.
through it and then we'll do practical stuff. Hopefully the stuff is practical along the way though too. But it's that fire element, right? That you
Yeah.
can go through like a Kundalini or something like that.
Yeah,
It
totally,
builds and
totally.
creates this fire and drive. It's funny you're talking about Lord of the Rings because I got my little Harry Potter thing. I always think of those two things together. I'm a bit of more of a Harry Potter person, so I have
Oh yeah.
the Don't Let the Muggles Get You Down cup with the little Luna on there. The little Luna archetype. Uh, I can always remember everything from the Harry Potter movies, but I can never remember shit from the Lord of the Rings. That's what made me think of
Yeah,
it.
I
I
might have
can
seen
never
one.
remember it.
I might have seen one Harry Potter movie, but
You don't give a shit about Harry Potter.
no Harry Potty.
I can't remember anything from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I love Lord of the Rings.
Just a bunch of like bearded men running around, yeah, and some dwarfs or whatever.
There
Don't
you
know.
go.
Some elves. They're trying to do something. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's a ring.
Sounds
There's
like
a
a
green,
normal sounds like a normal Friday night,
yeah,
in
a
Lincoln
green,
Park.
green shaky guy.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think the last thing, Eric, that I want to say about this is that, like, from a societal perspective, they have the allegory of the cave.
well, okay, I was going to remember one of your visions. Do you want me to share it, or do you want to do your allegory of the cave? Let me share your vision. This happened years
Okay.
ago,
Yeah,
more
I like
in the
that.
early times we knew each other.
Yeah.
And you said, "Hey, I had this visionary thing," and I was like, "Cool, lay it on me. This is part of our relationship. We talk back and forth about these
Yeah,
things."
yeah, yeah.
And I think we knew each other, but we've gotten to know each other more and more over the years, obviously.
Of course.
But you were talking to me about this, and it was like you felt like there was a fire that was going to burn. It was a bunch of people, maybe in a cave,
They were in a
and there
cave.
was a fire, and it was burning, and you could feel the flame going out, sort of almost from like your being out to the other beings or something. And I was like, that's a very Buddhist tantric vision.
Yeah, so I remember. Yeah, so I had
Did you
this.
remember this thing?
Yeah, I remember this thing.
Okay,
So I
okay, because
had
I was
this
thinking about it.
I had this meditation or a dream, I don't remember, but it was a very vivid thing that I was chained up in a cave with my hands next, my hands up on my sides in, like, very kind of old school handcuffs, but my body was clear. And there was all these other people chained up on both sides of the super long kind of corridor, dirt floor, cobblestone, archway and things like this. I was clear. The body was clear. Everybody else's body was clear. And it was very dark. And I looked down, and right just above my pelvic area was a small flame. And I started to kind of like, blow on the flame, just ever so.
Was it the AMSR part of the episode or something
That
like
Yeah,
that? The
yeah. I'm not gonna do it. I don't want to get people, riled up. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, yeah, got it.
And so as I did it, my body became far more luminous and stronger. So
Mhm.
I broke out from my chain, and then I not only was I illuminated, but I not only was I personally illuminated, and I realized I was in this dream or in this vision. I forget how it was. I immediately looked to my left and to my right, and there was maybe two or three other beings who had also gotten free. And
Mm.
we all turned around and started to try and ignite other people's fires who were chained up. And for the rest of my vision, or dream, which probably lasted realistically like 60 seconds, the more that I ignited the people's fire, like it was spreading from the light was spreading from body to body, because everybody else was translucent just as I was, and it was just, and I remember we were walking to get some a sandwich or something like this on one of the breaks from class.
Probably. Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
Uh-huh.
and telling you about it. Yeah, and just the same shit-eating grin that you have on your face now is the one you had
No, I
then.
love it because I love these conversations between us. It was always
Yeah,
I'm remembering back fondly in our knowing one another. We've had so many great conversations where we
yeah.
go through,
That was probably like
and
that was
I
probably
always
like
love it. Yeah.
that might
Uh-huh.
have been like 11 years ago, maybe 12.
Yeah, I'm not smiling at the vision. I'm smiling at the memory.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
so, it's like the kind of things where you're bonding with another person, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And you would share these things. And like I always felt like my thing was to go, okay, let me run it through my inner little, you know, stages of the past path, the Buddhist Tantra inner kind of schema and say, what is this? And I
Mm,
always loved those things. I was like, okay, there's the fire.
mm-hmm.
That's the tumo. And then the
Mm-hmm.
clearness of the figure is, and maybe we'll talk about this later, but they have this idea they call the illusory body.
Yeah.
And you can meditate on that. You can meditate yourself on a clear kind of hollow figure almost, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we'll talk about those meditations too a little bit. I guess we should a little bit mention that we're we're in initial plans of maybe doing a retreat on these kinds of things ultimately.
Yeah.
So more to be discussed, but we're in the early arrangements, so we'd really love to share these
Yeah.
things with people, maybe in some kind of retreat format too. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we're plotting that out as well. But there was all these different parts of it, and then like kind of like the amazing part of like interconnectivity.
Yeah.
Partially it's the local thing, but also it reaches out and it starts to spread, right? The enlightenment qualities. So it's very cool. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
like a
Yeah. Well, and it's
it's
and
were you going to talk about that one? We were talking about the cave
no,
or
no,
no?
no, I was going to talk
Okay.
about the actual allegory of the cave, but this is fine.
Same shit though, right?
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
much. Pretty much.
Though this is actually your vision's cooler.
Yeah.
The Plato's
Allegory.
all right, but of course it's
Yeah.
survived thousands of years. You gotta give him his props. But
Yeah, got it.
uh,
Yeah, okay, it's been around for a while.
it does prove that you and I listen to one another because I remember this vision from years ago. I was thinking about it. Yeah.
Yes.
So we actually do listen to one another. That's
Yes.
real friendship. Okay. Um, okay, so cool. I mean, I think the other like we'll get to the other parts of this, why to do this, right? Got a little time left. So
Yeah.
that kind of is like working with the emotions and trying to transform them. Maybe we'll go back to Dr. Nida a little bit more when we get to it because he has more to say about it, but you don't want to repress. We've done stuff on that too.
Yes.
Repression, tough, and again, we've done enough psychological episodes around that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
did an episode recently about the defense mechanisms, right? That a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people kind of dug. And, in doing the defense mechanisms, you repress, you're going to get defense mechanisms. It's going to go all kind of crazy. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's worthwhile really thinking about how to transform these things as opposed to trying to like smush them, right? You try to smush too much. So it's good to do all this kind of stuff. And again, like in my own personal experience, I found this to be very valuable, right? And I'll get to the other part, which is health reasons too, which you already kind of alluded to. I put that in my notes as well, right?
Yeah.
Because you're working with the constitutional energies kind of at the core. And I think Dr. Nita has a bunch of stuff on that too. If you can make the sexual energies healthy, it has a beneficial effect on the whole constitution, which you were talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I also had like, I thought the psychological health of this too was kind of cool to throw this in there as well, right? It transforms the mind in the
Yes.
sense that, again, you can get patterns of things like repression, you can face your desires in a more direct way, but the bliss thing is really good too, right? Because to be able to generate bliss within yourself is one of the antidotes to a lot of these negative emotions, right?
Yeah.
It's how you get over, at least it just goes to my experience. And like I'll share with you, you'll share back, and then maybe other people have their own experiences with this too. But for me, finding this ability to kind of generate this bliss within myself, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which, we're going to talk about paired practices. Karma Mudra, doesn't like, include having a partner, but there's like solo elements of this too, in the sense that you
Totally.
can learn how to meditate on your own sexual energies and
Yeah.
generate those feelings of bliss in yourself, even in your meditations as well as with a partner, right?
Yeah.
And the ability like to generate those feelings of bliss are very curative, I think, psychologically too, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
The other
want, yeah, go
the other
ahead.
part, Eric, is why it's important to why we're making such a big thing about this. And this is probably where we'll just, our topic will remain, for the rest of our time, to be honest, is that like you can the question to why do it is also about how to do it, right? Those two things are linked together. And why do it is that it's curative, right?
Mhm.
It's an antidote. And there's different antidotes to different things, generosity, just basic, like if you're too stingy, give things away that'll help you. If you
Yeah.
feel if you're too attached to this idea or that idea, generate feelings of compassion for other people. That say that's like a good thing to do. Um, but just being disciplined alone is probably not going to be enough to keep
Mm.
you returning to your meditation cushion or returning you to your practice, whatever your practice might be. And if the goal really is to transform your life, then you want to be either thinking about practice, talking about practice, or changing the way that you see things. We've talked about these like conventional truths and ultimate truths, or seeing beyond the mundane. So
Yeah.
you're not just seeing the world as like a bunch of ones and zeros, but the people that are existing in it are illuminated beings. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you know what I'm saying, but hopefully the audience understands that like you're actively trying to change the way in which you perceive the world, right? Because there is far more than what we are seeing. There's far more than what our senses allow us to interpret, right? Just
That
in
was
a
almost like my
traditional
crazy
standpoint.
channeling episode last time with Sarasvati, where I was like somewhat unhinged, but also feeling inspired, like overcoming these mundane conceptions and appearances and
Yeah.
replacing them with the extraordinary, right?
Yes. Yes.
And
Exactly.
with the divine or something, right? Yeah, totally in.
Yeah,
Yep.
and so like you cannot simply rely on discipline alone to keep you coming back and keep you on the practice, keep you on the path, keep you practicing. Even if you love it and find it intellectually stimulating, or even if this is what you grew up with and this is what you're forced to do and you know other way, that's not enough because deep down I believe, have to enjoy things. We have
Hmm.
to like them. Now, you can like things for different reasons. But for most people, what do most people like? Most people like sex. Most people like it. And if they don't like sex itself, they generally like feeling kind of saucy. People we love to feel, people I think
Hmm.
generally feel healthy wise, like to feel attractive to whom or to what, whatever that doesn't matter. But you want to feel attractive or you want to feel attracted. There's a lot of energy that goes on. And so these practices are sexual in nature because it will get you to return to practice again because it feels good. So instead of having somebody say, you got to eat your, Brussels sprouts because they're good for you and that's good, that's got to be good enough for you to continue to do it. So instead of having that voice in your mind telling you that you should do it because it's good for you, you are returning because you enjoy it, because there's bliss associated with it, because it's a positive experience for you. And a point that you make, Eric, with me personally is that like life is coming anyways. So why wouldn't you have a practice where you can enjoy things? You can do them with pleasure. And I think it changes the way that you experience the world, actually, that you are far more prone to look for joy. You're far more prone to look for pleasure. I don't necessarily only looking at things as a sexual pleasure, but finding joy and pleasure in everything because it changes and enhances your experience. And therefore, you are far more likely to continue this practice and making yourself look for more joy and more pleasure. And in that way, you're igniting your own fire. And when
Yeah.
people see that around you, they are intoxicated with it and they want to know. And then in this way, maybe you can light their fire and then you can start to light the fire around the community. And then you can make my vision a reality.
Yeah. Light my fire.
That's right.
I think okay, there's like I'll say my few things back because it's great. I was gonna say preach, Brother Daniel.
You can do it sometimes.
Channeling my Cornel West, Brother Daniel, preach.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I like as the immediate experience of that to share, I think when I was doing Zen in the very beginning, it can be pretty austere and demanding.
Hmm.
Now, you were also doing these kind of like inner fire practices, these
Yeah.
Kundalini breathing things.
Yeah.
And it was in the context of a lot of discipline, though. And I
Yes.
think at the time I was in my early 20s, and that was good for me. It wasn't bad. I was also raised Catholic, so there's a little bit like, okay, I'll just suffer through shit.
Right, right.
That's kind of what I learned, from,
Mm-hmm.
one part of my family lineage, which was my Catholic grandma, right?
Mm-hmm.
My dad was a very Protestant work ethic kind of guy on some level, probably Irish Catholic, but a little bit more Protestant work ethic. So he was like grinding through things. And then a weird thing happened. So I was doing Zen and I was learning, there's no doubt. But a weird thing happened to me where I got exposed to some of the Taoist sexual yogas.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing them kind of like on my own, as part of my Zen thing, because it was a Taoist school, but they weren't necessarily teaching that all the time. But I was like, I want to learn these things.
Who's that,
And that
Eric? Who sings that? On my own. Is that Patty LaBelle, I think?
the fans about, yeah. I was definitely like, I probably had a little inner trickster. So I probably like, we've talked about it before. I don't think Hosokawa Roshi, the Zen master, was like telling me to do that. I was like, I'm going to do this because I'm
Yeah,
just interested. But the epiphany for me was some of the things you're saying. I can remember being on Zen retreats being like, you can't just sit here and fucking suffer all the time.
right. Yeah.
Like you can't keep
Like,
doing it. If you've been on any of the, so you do have more moments of bliss and euphoria in those mindfulness retreats and Zen
sure.
retreats. They're not all like that, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
did have the exact thought you had. I was like, no, like you have to have bliss in things.
yeah.
And if the whole purpose of spirituality on some level is to overcome this dukkha problem,
The
this
suffering.
whatever you want to call it, suffering or unpleasantness or,
Yeah.
unhappiness, we've talked about that in a couple of episodes recently.
Malcontentedness.
Yeah, you can't go around being unhappy, you
Right.
know? And so I was like, this is fascinating because there's a way you can do this with a partner, but I was also learning the solo practices and I was like, you can just generate this bliss within your own sense of your own self. And then, just to share a little bit on, because we talked about it in Weird Experiences episode a long time ago, but I can remember like being on the Zen retreat and we were all sitting around to do our calligraphy exercise. Hosokawa Roshi, great Zen master, was there and you could see the talent of those people because I just started like, okay, I'm sitting on this hardwood floor, what they call seiza, where you sort of sit with your legs underneath you, and you're kind of sitting on your ankles and your knees are, the Japanese style of sitting. And I'm like, this fucking hurts. And I was like, I want to generate some bliss like right now. And so I kind of did these sexual meditations, like the solo, using your sexual energies for bliss that you can learn how to do. And I felt these waves of bliss through me. And then Hosokawa Roshi looked to me and said, what the fuck is this guy doing? They could feel it. And I went, oh, this shit's real, which is the other part of it. It's real.
Mm-hmm.
And, other people can feel it. And of course, he's a highly sensitive Zen master, but you can your energy will spread and affect other people. Your
Totally.
bliss will be contagious to other people
Yes.
in the way you act and the way you behave, but also just in your vibration in the world, your being in the world. It'll be that way, the way
Mm-hmm.
the energy will go out. So yeah, it's great. I think it's was psychologically transformative to me because I had a pretty hard upbringing. I had issues with maybe anxiety or depression things probably at some point in my life,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
getting my ass kicked when I was younger. And to be able to find that bliss was very psychologically transformative. And it made me realize like, okay, you have to find this to psychologically transform. That's the best way to transform is like through the bliss. And
Mm-hmm.
then it also was other things you were saying. You can't just go through and grind away at things. It's just not possible. You have to do
Yeah.
things from a place of joy and bliss. I think even as a doctor, I can remember I was working with the HIV patients. I had this clinic where I was part of a clinic where we were doing all HIV and AIDS patients, and we were working public health. And I remember thinking, there has to be joy in this work. You can't
Yeah.
just go
Yeah.
and find it your work. And so
Yeah.
this being able to find this place of bliss is really powerful because you can kind of like create it in yourself and carry it into your activities all over the place, and
Mm-hmm.
find it when you need it. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
okay, very cool. Um, all right, we got a couple other things here and the why to do it. So maybe I think this will be our subject matter of the day,
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
like you were saying. So bliss is connected to the ultimate or the deepest part of reality. I think this is a big part of like Buddhist Tantra for sure, right? And it spoke to me here, it spoke to me in the Zen thing, it spoke to me for Kabbalistic things and Sufi things as well, all the things that we know and love, where like what's the ground of being? What's the ultimate nature of things? It's bliss, right? Uh, our beloved Robert Thurman, Bobby T, for us, right, talks about this idea. It's bliss,
Mm-hmm.
right? Wisdom is bliss. So there's a kind of way in which you can say, from a tantric point of view, and then from these other traditions that we like as well, you can say, part of the experience of the foundational reality is like bliss. There's a, I mean, you can obviously make the most obvious thing that like anyone having sex, even if you're an atheist, says, "Oh God," at some point or another, right? Because you feel that bliss, and in that moment, you're not converting, but what you're feeling is like something of what is the ultimate in that moment, right?
Mm,
You know, um, so whether you want to call that God, or if you're a Kabbalist, you want to call it the light of the endless, or the Ein Sof without end, or if you're a Taoist and you want to feel what's the Tao, at least in this way of thinking and a tantric way of thinking, the part of the experience of that is bliss. It's one of the components of the experience, right? So sometimes I'll call it like in the in the Dalai Lama school of Buddhism, they'll talk about this clear light bliss and emptiness feeling, right? This feeling that ultimately reality is kind of formless. That's the emptiness part.
mm,
It's also like light and energy, like what you were talking about, right? And that energy and that formlessness is infused with bliss. That's the experience of the ground of being, right? Or
mm,
whatever you want to call it. And so, part of the reason for doing this kind of stuff is the more you can generate those kinds of feelings, you're approximating this experience of the ground of being or the ground of reality or whatever
mm,
word or phrase you like. You're getting down to the core of what things really are, which is, these qualities, that we were talking about, right? And bliss is the part of this, right? It's this
mhm.
feeling of blissfulness, right?
Right.
And it's very cool. And again, it was like one of the subject matters for my retreat, that just finished up recently, where I was like restudying some of the tantric practices that kind of go through this. They talk about this, and I was meditating on them, and so on. And you get to this idea that you're approximating and approaching this. The more you can generate these kinds of blissful feelings and work within yourself and your energies within yourself, again, solo with a partner or whatever works for you in terms
Right,
of your
right,
life,
right.
the more you can do it, the closer you're getting to this place. And they talk about it in a very smart way. They'll say, this is an example of this. They'll use this phrase, example clear light, but they mean an example feeling of those things, light and bliss and formlessness or something, right? And you get an example of it. And then you get another example of it. And maybe it gets closer and closer. So you're sort of approximating in on this experience that gets a chance to build over time for you. You'll get clearer and clearer on it
Hmm.
as you work through it repeatedly over your experience and doing practices. And eventually you'll get, you know, the example, and then you get the ultimate example, and then you get closer to the real experience of it. But they use it, they talk about it in this, what I think is a very like clever way. They're saying, okay, you may not get, you're getting closer to it.
Hmm. Hmm.
You're approximating it. The more you get closer and closer to the experience of this. So, anyways,
And on a mundane level, Eric, the more that you feel good, the better that you feel all the time.
also true.
You know what I mean?
So yeah, I mean, it's how it is. There's the ultimate tantric purposes,
Hmm.
you know, the experience of these really intense things, God, Ein Sof, Tao, the pure ground of being the clear light, bliss, emptiness, right? So you can do the high aspects of this, right? Which is, I think, part of what we want to kind of get across, right? That's true, right?
Hmm.
Getting to the deep experiences. But then you're right, it also changed your vibe on the day-to-day basis.
Hmm.
And then you're like nicer to your kids, or you're a better coworker at work or something, because
Yeah.
you're kind of in this space.
Yeah.
So the high part, and then the way that affects your life just in like moving through your life at a day-to-day basis, right?
Yeah.
I think when we get to the meditations of it, part of it will also be, looking at how you kind of work with your own internal energies to produce these things.
Yeah.
So the other part is, you learn how to work with the subtle parts of your own system, the subtle parts of your own energies. We'll drop this phrase later on. It's called a Vajra body. It's kind of like the channel system and the chakras and all this kind of stuff, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
The subtle energies that make up a person. But as you learn to feel those things and work with them, you can kind of use those experiences and that comfort with that to generate more and more kind of bliss within yourself,
Yeah.
right? And so it's almost like learning two sides of a thing. It's pretty interesting. You learn how to work with your own energies, and you also learn how to work with bliss, and you see how they kind of like connect together,
Hmm.
right? It's like
Hmm.
two sides of a coin, right?
Hmm. Yeah, you're almost like you're tuning yourself into the frequency. Like that thing is already in existence, and
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
sort of tuning your own little antenna to try and stay connected with it more often than not.
And I've always had kind of like the fascination with that. I was, again, on my retreat, I was working through um, sort of this commentary, like we're doing a commentary. I was reading a commentary, by one of these really deep Buddhist tantric teachers, Lama Mifam. And I've always been really fascinated by that idea of like experiencing the inherent bliss that's already there, right?
Yeah,
You're in a sea of bliss.
yeah,
I think this is what Robert Thurman was trying to do with his
yeah,
book, and he's going
yeah.
to cheer the fuck up,
That's
you
right.
know. Okay, maybe there's problems, but you're within a sea of bliss too.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Or, like Kabbalistically, you're within the light of the endless all the time,
All the
right? If you
time,
can
right?
just like kind of see it. So I think in this way, that's the deep part. And then it also like you're less crabby during your day. So it kind of like functions on multiple levels, right?
Hmm.
Okay, I had one other example of like why to do this, which I think a little bit relates back even to your vision too. Um, and I think, we've never done anything on some of the Kabbalah, which is another subject sitting out in the offing that we'll eventually get to. And it's almost related to other subject matters that maybe we'll talk to when we're here. Like maybe we'll talk a little bit about sex magic. Maybe we'll do a little bit on that, right? Or ritual magic can be connected to this in some ways.
Hmm.
But in some of the Kabbalistic teachings, especially, this is where it was most clear to me, though I think Taoist ones and Tantric ones get to this point too, which is if the universe is kind of like interconnected, right? And ultimately, we have these yin yang energies, these energies of polarity, right? In Taoism, we use this yin yang phraseology. We can use other language for this. We might be more Kabbalistic or more tantric, but okay, yin yang works. We all know the words and that. So, um, when you connect the yin yang energies in yourself, or you connect your yin and yang energies with a partner, that ripples out to the rest of the universe just intrinsically because of the way the universe is like interconnected and interwired, right? And that's a deep idea too, you know? So when you make yourself more interconnected, when you connect your heart and kidney, when you connect your things together, that's happening in you. But because the universe is all interconnected, it has an effect on the people immediately around you, but sort of
Hmm.
like the universe just as a whole, right?
Yes.
And then some of the really deep things that I think it'll take some Kabbalistic stuff to talk to and talk through, and maybe some of the Taoist stuff if we get to talking about these things ultimately. They kind of recognize that. And I try to say when you're making these interconnections within yourself, and I'll describe it a lot of times in kind of erotic imagery, right? Like you're working with those energies that connect and create joy and bliss within yourself. You're almost triggering out to the more subtle yin yang elements of the universe to like channel good energy through.
Hmm.
Now, that can be used in like magical ways, I suppose, right? We talk a
Hmm.
little bit about sexual magic things, right? Which is more like, I guess, using the sexual energies in a more personal way to see if you can bring positive things into your life.
Hmm.
But even like psychospiritually, you know, uh, from a point of view of compassion and those sort of more goals of what you might call a bodhicitta, if you're being kind of Buddhist about it, trying to bring compassion and love and enlightenment into the world. There's
Hmm.
this really deep idea that when you connect the yin and yang in yourself, you also have you help the whole universe connect yin and yang,
Hmm.
and that's creates positive energy just everywhere. It's a deep idea, right? You got
Well,
something on that one?
no, no, it's just, yeah, no, you're weaving it together. And that's and we gave some definitions of karma, action, mudra, seal,
Mm.
tantra, to weave.
Yeah, yeah, it weaves it together. The universe is woven. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember like getting this, I think where it got most, I started to have it when I was doing Taoist things. I started to realize like, okay, from a Taoist, we're going deep, but from a Taoist point of view, the whole universe is kind of like a sexual creation. You and I have talked about this before a little bit, maybe off mic, you
Yeah.
know, the Big Bang is like a Big Bang,
Oh, yeah, that's
and
the original orgasm.
yeah, yeah. And, the womb of the universe is there and the flow is going into it. And here we all are.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And like there's the yin and yang at the core of that, right?
Yeah.
Those powerful energies. And or in the Kabbalah, it came across too. And Kabbalah deserves its own special discussion. We'll get back to it at some point. but they very like there's parts of the Kabbalah that are really amazing and that they talk that way. And they say, when you do your practice, you're helping the yin and yang energies of the universe coalesce. And that creates almost like kind of a pouring down of positive energy that can come to you, but
Hmm.
also spreads to everyone. Right.
Hmm.
So that beautiful part of like, this the sexual imagery and the sexual energies and how they can spread to connect things together.
Yeah,
Mm.
I think I'll say this, and then maybe we should give our final shots
But
here.
it also makes you feel better on a daily basis.
It definitely does. So we should have Rory on again, maybe Rory Hiltbrand. He talked about this, and it's interesting, because he studies numerology and he's working with a Taoist lineage that, dates back very, very far.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, and the way he talks about this is that and he's a mathematician. He's an acupuncturist, but he has his, whatever, his master's in math, PhD in math, whatever, however it is. And what he says is that, like, so everybody, is probably familiar with the symbol of the Tai Chi, right? The yin and yang, the two fish, kind of chasing each other, right? But the way that he describes it, and I love it, is that that's a two-dimensional slice. Okay, so for those who are watching now, it's good to see, watching. It's a two-dimensional slice of a three-dimensional shape, a sphere.
Mm.
And so we think about that Tai Chi symbol, right? In the darkness, there's one dot of light. And in the light side, there's one dot of darkness. But actually, those dots, if you flip a two-dimensional image and you make it three dimensions, that's the center. That's the center of this sphere.
Okay. Yeah,
Those
yeah,
two
yeah.
dots.
Hmm.
Right. And so essentially when you're working with those energies, you're creating a vacuum right in the center. And what's right at the
Hmm.
center? It's the center. It doesn't matter what system you're working with. There's a hollow tube in every single center of the center of your body. There's this tube, and this tube sends information, up and down where? In and out from the universe, from the environment. You know what I'm saying? So as you're aligning yourself, as you're attuning yourself with this, with the yin yang, essentially, you are changing the way in that you're changing your own personal orientation, your own electromagnetic orientation, your own aura, if we want to be new age spiritual about it, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know but there's physiological effects on your field when you do this. And so I just love that kind of idea that
It's
you
very
do.
mathematical to take the two-dimensional space, the shape, and like start to expand it out into the three dimensions and see it
Yes.
that way. You
Yeah.
don't hear people talk that way too much. It's very unique.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very unique. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
called and it is a shape. It's called a torus, you know
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so I was showing him pictures that I have, of my particular practice, where essentially, like, the center, you change by doing this practice, you change the shape of your aura, and you go from being like a shape like an egg to more like a cocoon. Now, I've known this
Okay.
for quite some time, but then he's talking about this torus, which is essentially like a donut,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
a cocoon is kind of like a weird shaped donut as well. So, like, there's just so many similarities that it's just like, it's wild once you start seeing, like, the very deep. And this is, and we'll leave it here because we're going to pick up with this next time, and maybe I'll just leave it as a cliffhanger. The very deep layers of practice, actual practice, like, for real. I'm not talking Allen Iverson. For those basketball fans who know what I'm talking about, he's like, practice. You talking about practice? Not a game, practice.
No, Allen Iverson was like practice, fuck practice.
Yeah, exactly. But
Yeah.
when you start talking about deep levels of practice that transcend um, ideologies, that transcend dogmas, that transcend cultures, that transcend religions, they start to look really similar in terms of what they're doing.
Yes, you kind of get to almost like what do they call it? The primordial philosophy or the perennial philosophy or
There
something
you
like
go.
that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
guess the only
yeah,
last yin yang thing I would say that's because it's deep in the Kabbalah
yeah.
is it's very fascinating because they'll say like yin and yang are kind of yearning to unite with one another. They'll say it that way. There's a yearning there, and they do it really beautiful in the Kabbalah. They kind of talk about almost like two lovers that are parted, you know. they have really beautiful imagery for this. And then as you go and participate in this process within either in your own solo practice or with a partner or whatever, and you bring yin and yang together in whatever way you're doing that,
Yeah.
um, you're helping those parts of the universe that are yearning to be united unite.
Yeah.
And that gets you to sexuality and also love. Like as we
Yeah.
started in the beginning, right? There's that yearning to connect, right?
Yeah.
And
It's
they
like,
do it. I mean, Kabbalah is beautiful on that point too.
oh
Just
yeah.
to add another part to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, for those who are familiar with the little rascals, the two parts of Alfalfa's hair. One is part of here, one's they want to be.
I'm trying to remember his hair like that way. I don't remember.
Uh,
Yeah, I guess that could be what you're thinking about. Mhm. You put it together as one mohawk or something.
that's right.
Okay, yeah.
One faux hawk. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's I think it's a good place to stop because we're gonna
Yeah.
pick up next time talking about these kind of like secret aspects of practice. So,
Yeah. We'll do misconceptions about the Mahamudra too. Or
yeah,
about not Mahamudra, Karma Mudra.
Karma
Mhm.
Mudra. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Thanks, Daniel.
All right, Eric, thank you so much for doing this. This is always a good, a good time here. I
Yeah.
hope our audience, enjoys our work. And, if you're feeling our style, hit us up, ginandtantra@gmail.com, or, leave us a DM at the Gin and Tantra podcast on the old Instagram. If you know us personally and you want to send us text messages to say how much you love it, please do that. We enjoy that. Eric is on Facebook at Eric Baker. I'm on Facebook also at Daniel Domolekny. So definitely feel free to shout us out, share, like, subscribe, comment, do all the things that people ask you to do because we're also one of those people who are out here in the social media world creating content and sharing really things that are far older than us. And hopefully we'll be around for a lot longer after we are gone. So thank you for tuning in. As always, for Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.